Tonight on Newshour, Australia and its allies have launched the largest ever military drill. It's called Exercise Talisman Sabre. It's happened before, but never on this scale, now featuring live fire exercises, new weapon systems, and even significant expansion into space-based operations. Well, over 35,000 troops from 19 different nations, including the US, UK, Japan, India and Canada, are all taking part from key locations in Australia and Papua New Guinea. For the first time, Australia has fired long-range HIMARS missiles capable of striking targets up to 400 kilometres away. Meanwhile, commercial and military satellites are busy beaming information to hone battlefield awareness in the region. Well, as expected, this has not gone unnoticed in Beijing, with Chinese surveillance ships expected to be keeping a close eye on what's happening. This purposeful but very awkwardly timed military show of strength began as Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was on his way to meet China's President Xi in Beijing. Now, despite the missiles and manoeuvring, the meeting between the two leaders earlier today was described by Mr. Albanese as constructive, with a big Australian delegation busy signing MOUs and banqueting with business leaders. But what does China really think as officials break bread with guests who so overtly flex their military muscles nearby? We'll go live to our correspondents in Asia and the US for the latest from the field, and then speak to an analyst in Chongqing, China, to get his thoughts. But first, let's take a look at this report.
Australia has successfully launched its High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, HIMARS, for the first time during multinational military exercises with the United States and regional allies, marking a significant leap in the country's defence capabilities. The milestone event took place in Queensland as part of Exercise Talisman Sabre 2025, a biennial joint training operation that has grown into one of the Indo-Pacific's largest military drills. This year's edition features over 30,000 personnel from 13 nations, reflecting a deepening web of regional security cooperation. Australian forces conducted the HIMARS live fire independently, marking the first such launch on home soil by the Australian Army. The mobile precision strike system, made famous for its effectiveness in Ukraine, is capable of hitting targets over 300 kilometres away, offering Australia new long-range strike potential. Brigadier Nick Wilson, Director General of the Joint Live Fire Component, praised the occasion as a defining moment.
That was the most complex combined live fire exercise that we have undertaken in 11 iterations of Talisman Sabre 25. Just as importantly, today was the first time the Australian Army has live fired our long-range multi-domain platforms, being the HIMARS. So it is a remarkable day.
This HIMARS debut underscores a shift in Canberra's defence strategy outlined in the 2024 Defence Strategic Review. The document calls for Australia to develop deterrence at distance through precision long-range fires, integrated networks, and enhanced cooperation with like-minded nations. The system's deployment took place alongside coordinated operations with Japanese and American forces, adding a layer of trilateral interoperability to the launch. It comes as part of a broader transformation of the Australian Defence Force into a more agile, threat-responsive military. Brigadier Wilson explained the purpose behind HIMARS in a regional context.
The HIMARS will be utilised in conjunction with a number of other weapons platforms, together with our regional partners, to ensure that we have a strategy denial that will allow for security, peace and stability within the Indo-Pacific.
While analysts see the exercises as a subtle message to China, Wilson stressed that the drills are not aimed at any particular nation.
Well, as per all Talisman Sabre from its commencement in 2005, we certainly don't orientate the exercise to any nation in particular. More, it offers an opportunity for us to practice our interoperability with our close partners and demonstrate our commitment to a sovereign, free and stable Indo-Pacific.
Australia's HIMARS launch is part of a rapid upgrade in its military reach. Until recently, the Army's indirect fire capability had been limited to short-range systems. That's now changing.
We've gone from an Army most recently with an indirect fire range of 20+ kilometres to one in excess of 400 kilometres.
As regional security dynamics shift, this launch signals that Australia is no longer merely responding to change, it is preparing to shape it.
Okay, let's now cross over to our correspondent Laura Westbrook in Hong Kong for us with the latest reaction to this. Laura, what more can you tell us about these drills, and how have the Chinese media and countries who are not participating responded so far?
Well, Guy, the drills are known as Talisman Sabre, and they began in 2005 as a joint exercise between the United States and Australia. This year, more than 35,000 military personnel from 19 countries, including Canada, France, India, Japan, the Philippines, South Korea and the United Kingdom, are taking part over 3 weeks. It consists of a live fire drill in Australia and will also take place in neighbouring Papua New Guinea, making it the first time these activities have been held outside Australia. Now, Australia's Defence Industry Minister Pat Conroy said Chinese surveillance ships were expected to monitor the exercise, just like they've done since 2017. He added that would include collecting intelligence around procedures and use of communication, and that he would make adjustments on how they conduct the exercises accordingly. Beijing's military has been accused of expanding its influence in the Pacific, and analysts say a key goal of the combined displays of force is convincing Chinese leadership that it would be too risky to use military force to assert territorial claims. These exercises, which showcase Australia's defence alliance with the United States, also coincide with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese visiting China to boost trade ties. Now, Albanese told reporters he wouldn't raise Chinese surveillance of military drills in a meeting with President Xi Jinping. After the two leaders met, Albanese said that the two countries had strategic competition in the region, but would continue to engage in order to support peace and security.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Well, let's stay with our correspondents for now and cross over to Washington, D.C., where Kate is joining us. Kate Fischer. Kate, what has the Pentagon said about these drills, and how are officials in Washington publicly describing the purpose of these expanded US military activities in the region?
Well, Guy, the Pentagon has said this is all about working together with its allies and strengthening ties with them, particularly the long-standing alliance that the US has with Australia, and welcoming even more countries into this military alliance and this practice, essentially also acting as a deterrent to China. They want this show of force to put China off from any potential aggression in that part of the world. The Pentagon saying that upholding security in the Indo-Pacific is predicated on trust, and military exercises like these allow that trust to build between people, between military members from all these different countries. And the fact that this is 19 countries, the most that have ever taken part in this, the Pentagon says just underscores this shared understanding of the importance of working together and collectively to ensure lasting security. And of course, it suggests that even more nations are beginning to be concerned about the rising aggression from China. Papua New Guinea, this is the first time they have been involved in this because they signed a security deal with the United States in 2023. The Department of Defense in Washington saying that they will be doing complex military operations, seizing terrain, live fire drills, lots of practice with drones, which of course have become so important in the conflict in Ukraine. Essentially showing China that the US and its allies are more agile and they can do these large-scale operations. It's interesting, of course, though, that this shows a united military front between the US and its allies at a time when political tensions are so high, with so many of these countries involved in these military exercises at the same time trying to negotiate trade deals with Washington, and that is an interesting dynamic.
Very interesting indeed. Kate, thank you very much for joining us there from Washington, D.C. Okay, joining me now to discuss this further and in more detail is the political analyst Alex, reporter for I in Chongqing, China. Alex, great to see you there. Alex, we've all had awkward meetings, I think, before with people where issues are left undiscussed. But when you're sitting down to talk to a prime minister of a visiting country, and at the same time there are missiles, blasting into the sky, this great show of strength not too far away. I mean, awkward to say the least. Is it something that will have come up when the two leaders met? And if so, what does Beijing really think about this military exercise?
Well, to be honest with you, here in China, we look at these exercises as irresponsible, a little bit reckless. We hear that term show of force against the Chinese, who could be a threat in the region, but we are talking about a country that has not been in a conflict since the late 70s. So a little bit of, I guess, comedy to hear some of our other correspondents say the rising risk of China. I think today's exercise was, I would say, a dog and pony show of collective Wests that are walking around saying, hey guys, this is what is for sale. The big bad boy, China. If you want to protect yourself, come and watch our military display from 19 countries that are all part of the military industrial complex. Like nothing more than to sell this hardware, inflict fear on these nations, and China doesn't buy that. I think Albanese was probably sitting there feeling a little bit awkward for most point, and all the crew around him. But I think, there is a silver lining here. And I think what Albanese has done is he's told China, if our greatest trading partner, China, to Australia, can protect its waterways between the nation of China and Australia, then our trade will not be disrupted. And I think that that's how the Chinese think, rather than thinking some hypothetical risk that China may inflict on these nations in a country that has not been in combat since the late 1970s.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point. I mean, do you think there will be any response from China, either overtly or covertly, either diplomatically or militarily?
Well, once again, this is a country that builds for defense, not for offense. I had the luxury of attending the Zhuhai Air Show in China last year in 2024 and managed to watch the weaponry hall full of hardware that could actually, defend this entire nation. And, this to me shows a show of force from China, but not in an aggressive way, more in a defensive way, saying, you know what, guys, we're ready if you decide to do something a little bit off record. We'll call it crazy.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Because you talked there about the defense being the strategy of the Chinese. I think the US analysts also talk about their interest in the region being primarily one of defense, battling for trade routes and control of sea lanes and various things. If every side describes themselves as only doing this for defensive, precautionary reasons, does that mean that we're stuck in a sort of diplomatic stalemate, do you think?
Well, let's look at Americans' game plan over the last 20 years. Regime change, regime change, regime change, regime change. Very clear. What on earth are the Americans floating their aircraft carriers in the South China Sea for? Well, Japan is there too. The Band of Brothers stick together and continue to stick together. How many aircraft carriers from China are sitting on the ports of California, just floating out in the water there. There would be mayhem if that happened. So America, get your boats out of the water. Everything will be fine. Everything will be calm. China is a country that likes to do trade. It doesn't like to bomb, bankrupt, or bully other nations. And that's, well, what we're kind of seeing here, where Australia is, the Australians are puffing out their chest because they got the almighty Americans and the collective West behind them in a dog and pony show to the world to probably sell arms. There was probably countries or companies down there that McDonnell Douglas, Raytheon, that are probably just sitting there waiting to write out some juicy orders from nations during this, I would say, reckless showcase of arms from the West.
It's very interesting that, yeah, it's a good point, because I suppose there is clearly a strong relationship between Australia and the US, but equally China is still their biggest trading partner. In this delegation that came with the Prime Minister, there were a number of business leaders. They've been banqueting together with Chinese officials this evening, clearly hoping for positive economic outcomes. Is Australia stuck then between a rock and a hard place? To what extent does it disappoint one of the big actors by supporting the other? Do you see, how does Beijing perceive Australia in this dynamic?
Once again, this is a country that is building relationships around the world. You just got to type in 3 words, BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, which collectively has over 154 nations that have signed on to do business with China. China wants to do business, not interested in bombing, not interested in bankrupting. It wants to do business. Now, you asked that point. It's a very interesting comment that you said, where if Australia could be stuck in this. Let's see what the Trump administration has to bully or push Australia into a corner when it comes to trade. The good thing is, and the great thing is that there's a nice waterway that we can ship the items here from China to Australia and help that nation prosper. We've seen other nations that have been under attack by the United States, even sanctioned into the oblivion like Russia. But yet, if you ask the World Index on some of the most robust economies in 2024, some of them are the most sanctioned. But some of them have a friend, and that friend is China.
So do you think that we can trade our way out of this then? Do you think it's necessarily inevitable that at some point the US and China are going to clash? Because that seems to be the narrative we often hear, that at some point there's going to be some sort of either military or enormous economic collision between these two great powers. Do you think that that's necessarily the case, or are you a bit more positive about the future?
Well, that's a fantastic question, but let's just go back and look at the American track record. After the internet was brought in, we had a very big downturn in the stock market in the year 2000, followed by a financial catastrophe in 2008. We had a 2018 sell-off on massive markets, and these markets are riding high when tariffs are inflicting pain. The Americans brag about, oh yes, we have a $27 million surplus on our balance sheets, or billion, pardon me, with a B, from the tariffs. Those tariffs are coming from mom-pop businesses. Those tariffs are coming from the bottom line, or the quarterly reports about to be reported here in the US. And I feel all hell is going to break loose here in the financial markets unless the Trump administration backs down from that. I think, with partners like China that has brought 850 million people out of poverty, they will lead the way. And I think trade is a way to get out of this. But if we see the Americans continue to spiral with their economy, well, as we say, the guilty always scream the loudest, and desperation usually means destruction. And that's when the Americans will be shopping around, looking for another war to balance the balance sheet.
Alex, thank you very much indeed for giving us that analysis from China. Okay, from HIMARS launches then to space-coordinated manoeuvres. This year's Talisman Sabre exercise is shaping new rules for power projection in the Indo-Pacific. For allies and adversaries alike, the message is clear. Readiness spans every domain. Well, that is all for this edition of Newshour. From all of us here at A News, thanks for being with us.